Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be addressing tenant creation using Python, creating it into a function and being able to call that function. In the previous video we did authentication, so let's take it away and we go through each error one step at a time. Okay, so as you remember, or if you have not seen in the previous videos, we created the token so that we can reuse this. At the moment, I've saved the username and password for the Cisco sandbox inside of the file. This will be taken away eventually. So let's create a new file called tenant.py. .py extension is specific so that as said before, so that the computer knows how to deal with the file. Okay. Now, some similar things that we will be using, we'll still be using JSON request and the URL lib library, including the URL lib disable warnings, because we are not going to be speaking to an SSL certificate server. So let's just grab that. Okay. Okay, then the next part we're going to do is test. Okay, so we want to make sure that we can actually access our login file. So the first thing is we need to import from the login, import login. This means that I'm from this login .py, I'm going to import the function called login, which is inside of it. Okay, then let's just save that for now. Now, if you don't know where to start in this section, right, the easiest way is to go and grab a similar function like this and edit it to what you need it to do. So what we're going to do is we're first going to log into the Apic and get the payload that we need. So let's just close that, and we're going to go to, this is the developer.cisco.com sandbox environment. It will be shared again as in all the previous videos. It's a link in the description. So if you go to the data center section, you'll see there's an ACI simulator, which is always on sandbox. Here is the credentials with username, admin, password, and the sandbox apicdc.cisco.com as the URL. Now I've already saved it, so let's just go there quickly. Now, if you go to the tenants tab, and today this is obviously quite busy. There's a lot of tenants. So if you don't know how to create the tenants from the first time around, you're first going to go to this little gear here, and you're going to open up the API inspector. This is your bread and butter when capturing any call in terms of turning it into a function that can be configured on the Apic. Okay. I do not want to scroll to the latest section, so let's just pull that off to the side and I'll bring it back now. So in order to create a tenant, you need to go to that little toolbox and say create new tenant. Now the important parts about this is that you have a tenant name. So I'm going to call it, let's call it alpha tenant. Let's give it an alias, alpha tenant underscore alias. Let's just do the same. The reason I am specifically description, the reason I'm calling these objects similar to their name is so that when I read the tags afterwards in the payload, that I understand what my input was as a user to what needs to be formatted later on. So those are the three main things that we need. Apic just needs to respond because this server is very busy today. That's all. Okay, so before I actually go and commit this, see there's already a lot of things that's come up, so I'm going to clear that first and just have it around there. And you'll see when I submit, I'm going to get a post here. There we go. So I can just go and search for the specific post. Okay, post, which is that first one. And this is the important information that I require out of it. Copy. So generally, I like to kind of take this payload and just neaten it up so that I can read it easier. So I go to the easiest way for me to find it is the best JSON viewer. And then this code beautify.org, and I copy and paste the payload there, and I just beautify it. Copy that. Now we've got something to work with from a JSON structure. And then the other important part is the URL. Those are the main things that we're going to be looking at when using our code. So I'm going to drag that off to the side, and then we'll copy and paste that into our editor, Visual Studio Code. For now, I am going to go back to tenants, and this alpha tenant that I created, I'm going to delete. All tenants, because I want you guys to see what happens when we actually create it. So there's my alpha tenant. Let's just delete that object. Okay, all clean. I think for now I'll log out just to keep things clean. And let's go to the function, or the function that we are going to create now. So the first entry point that you want in a Python file is always this if underscore name equals main. And then now I'm going to state my variables that I'll be using to run this directly as a file. In a normal scenario, you're going to be injecting your variables into this function, like we're going to be doing with the login that we're using, so that it's not a static username and password, but for the purposes of the video, we'll just be using static entry points. So, or static variables. So URL is equal to sandbox.apicdc.cisco.com. That's correct. Then we've got a username. Admin. We've got a password. So this one I'm going to copy and paste. Okay, now remember we put in 3 different variables. Now when I create an read section in the Python file. Let's just go and pull that out there. This is the information that we were working with. So I put in a tenant name, I've put in a tenant alias, and I've put in a tenant description. That is the three variables that we will need for this file. So tenant, let's call it name, is equal to Python tenant. Tenant alias is equal to, let's call it fairly similar so we just see it easier. Spell tenant correct. And let's go tenant description is equal to description. Okay, now that we've got all of that sorted out, we are going to create the function. So the function that we want is just called tenant to make it easy. The tenant is going to take 3 arguments. So it is, no, more than 3 arguments actually. It's 3 variables and another 3 arguments, which is the destination of Apic, the user name, password, a tenant name, tenant alias, and tenant description. Okay, that should be everything. Okay, now that we've got that, in order to generate any object on Apic, you need your token, your authentication cookie. Now, we've already done the authentication method in order to obtain the cookie with the username and password and Apic address. So now we're going to get that cookie back from that authentication section. So the first thing we need to do is assign a cookie variable. And the cookie variable is equal to login. And this is a function, and I'm going to pass the Apic username and password into it. And the reason for this is because when I go to this function, right, at the end, it returns the token for me. So that's why the return token is going to be the variable called cookie over here. Okay, the next thing is the base URL. So we're going to create a base URL is equal to this is Apic / API / dot format Apic is equal to Apic. Now again, this first Apic refers to the entry point in the string, where in this Apic refers to the Apic passed into the tenant. So this one goes into that one, which is equal to that one, which gets injected into that space. just if that was not clear. Okay, that's done. Now we're going to say URL prepend is equal to. Now this part, I always make a little note here. It's this section here. So if you say copy that, because we ended off with a // there, so we're going to not take that / in. And our destination is this. So node MOTN tenant name.json. So let's just go there. This entire thing needs to be inside quotation marks because it is a string. Okay, so let's create this. It is tenant name dot format. Tenant name equals tenant name. Now we've got the URL is equal to the base URL concatenated with URL prepend. Headers. So headers is equal to a JSON object or a dictionary with content type equal to application JSON, and then the connection is keep alive. Okay. Now we've got a pre-payload JSON object. Now I'm just going to take that out for a second. That is this whole section that we got from the Apic by generating the object on the front end. So let's make that a little bit nicer. Yeah, that's pretty decent. Okay, so now we need to go and edit all of this information. So this, for example, everywhere where I see only that name, that becomes the tenant name. So let's first do that. To speed things up, we're just going to copy and paste. This will become dot format. Tenant name equals tenant name. Let's copy and paste that. This is the alias. Tenant alias, yeah, that's fine. Dot format tenant alias equals tenant alias. Predictive tab 9 is working quite well. And the description. Format tenant description equals tenant description. Okay. If the predictions were wrong, we'll get an error and we can resolve the errors one by one as they come up. Okay, now we've got a pre-payload. Now we need to change this payload into a JSON dumps. So we're going to say payload is equal to JSON.dumps, and we pass in the pre-payload dictionary or JSON dictionary. So that's done. Now we need to create the actual response. So the response is equal to requests.request. And now we're going to pass in the types. So we are doing a post because we're creating an object. We are going to be passing in a URL that we've already created further up, which is over there. We will be doing a cookie, and the cookie will be, let's say, just equal to cookie. I think we did spell it only cookie. Yeah, that's correct. This is cookies. Okay. Let's see, what else are we needing? We need a payload. So our data that we will be passing will be equal to the payload. And then we've got headers that we want to pass in. So headers equals headers. And we want to do a verify is equal to false. That seems to be fine. I think we've got everything there. Now we do a JSON underscore response is equal to JSON loads.response.text. That's correct. And we will be returning generally I like to return just the response code. So the status code, so like this. But for the purposes of this, I will quickly just print out, I think it was the JSON loads. Okay, well, let's just first do this. So just do response.text. Whoops. Okay. We're not technically using this right now. Maybe I can just pass in that actually. Okay, save. Okay, let's see how it goes. Let's drag this up and we'll work on the errors one by one as they come up. Okay, so run. Oh, okay. This obviously will not work yet because I need to call my function. So copy. Let's also create a print tenant. And inside my tenant, I'm going to be passing my variables. So URL, comma, user, let's just username, password, tenant name, tenant alias, and tenant description. Okay, but this is wrong. It has to be that. And just to verify the capitals are not correct, so I'm going to make sure I just copy and paste them incorrectly. URL here is incorrect. This needs to be an equal sign because I'm assigning a value to the variable. That looks fine. Okay, let's see. Okay, so if we go back to the original, see if I can blow this up. When we created the post on the front end, we got this response from the Apic when we inspected to use the inspector. So if you can look at this, This section is exactly the same as this section here, and the response code is 200, which is okay. 200 means your object was successfully created, or what you tried to do was successful. So let's just go and clean up a bit now. So we don't need this. This is not being read at all. We don't need this, but I generally leave this in just for future reference, to make sure that when whoever comes after, they understand what it's doing over there. And we don't need this anymore. So save. That is your tenant being created. Now to verify this, I'm going to keep this open and say we've created Python tenant and Python tenant alias and Python tenant description. Let's verify that on the Apic we can actually see those that object with its attributes. So I'm going to log in. We go to tenants, all tenants, and considering there's a lot of tenants at the moment, I'm going to have to look at a bigger list. Now you can always just put your name of your tenant in here and it'll take you straight to it. But here it is, Python tenant alias, and Python tenant description. This is now an empty tenant with nothing inside of it. From here, we can carry on creating more objects underneath this tenant. So in the next video, we are going to create a context, or otherwise known as a VRF, and we will be then doing a bridge domain as well, so that we can take the journey through ACI a bit further. If you like this video, please subscribe, ring the bell, and join us for all our coding adventures.